So we said, who wants to invest $100 million? It's like, wow. A guy who was at just a couple of months earlier thinking about being a taxi driver, now he has $100 million to go to Snap. Now that you have your first deal, it's like how you scale the business, how you repeat the story, because it's kind of like solving the chicken and egg problem.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook Podcast, where we share inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today's guest is Nabil Borhanu, who is the founder of Graphene Ventures. They invested in both Snap and Lyft at a late stage before the IPO. He's got a very interesting background, having grew up in Saudi Arabia and worked his way up through starting multiple companies and then also running multiple divisions of massive companies like Saudi Telecom. One day, circumstances changed and he left Saudi to go all the way to America and start afresh. And for a time, he wasn't sure if it was the right move or not. But today, he's investing in companies all across the world, especially focusing on how they can penetrate the Middle Eastern market. He's got a fascinating story, so let's get on to the show. Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook, Nabil. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, pleasure of mine, and thank you for having me.
You're our first entrepreneur to be joining us from Riyadh. And I know your story that you grew up in Riyadh and then you've moved across the world and you've been in LA, you've been in Silicon Valley. But can you tell us where your entrepreneurship journey started from?
As you probably know, I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia. So I actually was born in the eastern side of Saudi, where Saudi Aramco is. So the oil company. Moved to Riyadh in 1992 in high school. And basically, I think I probably had that entrepreneur DNA because when I was a child, I used to buy stuff, and I'm originally from Eritrea. So on the first trip that we had with my mother in 1986 to Eritrea, what I did is I went with her and we were buying stuff from wholesale and then selling back home. So she gave me the money that she gave me, and I bought some stuff, thought of that I went there and tried to sell them. Apparently I was not able to do so because she was like, no, you need to give this out as gifts to people that you're seeing. And then I asked for compensation. So I asked for my money. But then I was always I tend to buy stuff with my parents' money and resell them to my parents and own them for free. So you can tell that I've been probably having my tricks and navigating my way. So I'm thinking of many ways to basically start and have my own capital. As a child, I was always talking about investments since I was a child, but obviously I had very limited resources, but it was fun.
And what was the first major business you started? Because I know there's been 3 major ones you did before going into venture capital. Could you tell us about the first one and what you learned from it?
Yeah, so I actually went out of school to the first company I worked for, and I was employee number 3 at the time. It was pretty much I didn't know that it used to be called startup, but it was a startup at the time. Most of the businesses in the Middle East is more about trading, more or less. And at the time, I learned a lot because we were pretty much a small team. And being a part of a small team, you would do almost everything. You would do a bit of HR, a bit of accountant. So these kind of learnings helped a lot in trying to understanding how businesses work. And then in late 2004, early 2005, basically, with 4 friends of mine, we decided that we were going to have the first portal where we start selling prepaid cards online. So what we used to do at the time is basically we hired a bunch of labor and we would buy those physical prepaid cards, where basically that's how it used to get sold before. And they would scratch the numbers and then manually enter them into a website. And we would basically have that front end connected to a bank, and we would start basically selling those cards. What we noticed, we were just soon, and out of the first week, we were having almost $5,000 of sales every day. It was quite a good experience. Early on, we had one of the largest resellers calling us up because they noticed that we were actually doing this a lot, and they just didn't wanted to know who's these small guys who are selling this bunch of cards every day. So we basically went back, and they offered to acquire us. So the first learning I got, they offered the business cost us probably less than $25,000. We were offered in less than 6 months someone to buy us out at $1.5 million. And we were 4 partners, one of which actually thought that this is nothing and he wanted more money. So we rejected the offer. But in the end, the business basically had to shut down because obviously the incumbents started moving and having their own ways and means to sell online. So there was a lot of learnings there because at some point you want to know who you are, your value, whether you have the capital or not. If you are a bunch of co-founders working together, you want to streamline your interest and have some kind of, a common goal. And then the roles also have to be defined pretty well in a way that there is a belief when one would make the call, there is a belief that they're going to make the right call for everyone. So at that point, I was like, okay, there's actually an Arab saying what it means like, if many people are cooking this, basically are cooking the same thing all together, the pot will never actually flourish. You're not going to get what you want. Something's going to get burned because everyone is chipping in. So this was actually a big learning for me. So on the next venue, I actually moved to the largest ICT company in the Middle East back then. And they brought me in as a sales director for telecom and what they call large accounts. So the reason was because it was known as an ICT company and they wanted a guy who has a telecom background to get to build that business. At the time, it was kind of funny because I always tell this story where the largest telco company, and telcos were actually the biggest spender anyways, which is STC in Saudi. I used to walk into their buildings and I didn't know a lot of people. But I used to do, by nature, I'm probably kind of a social person. So what I used to do is get some bunch of Dunkin' Donuts and I would just roam around and just get into the building and just go in between the offices and just throw these donuts in. And the beauty of it is each office had the name of the guy, and the Arab culture actually helps you because you just keep smiling and basically giving all these donuts out. And for me, the main reason why I was doing that, it was big because I wanted to hear what's going on. And every time, you can pick up on a project and at least understand what's happening there. So it's kind of like a social effort to get somewhere. And I remember that one day I didn't show up. And one guy was like, "What is that donut guy?" I was kind of like probably looked at as the delivery guy rather than the one who's trying to make business here. And I became kind of like known among the people that I was trying to get in touch with and connect with. And then we went through the process. Actually, they helped me in getting into becoming a vendor. And then the natural way in the Middle East, you would go out to all different exhibitions. So you would go to the GSM World, for instance, that used to happen in Barcelona back then, to CeBIT in Hanover in Germany, and try to find small vendors here and there where you can actually get them business in the Middle East. So the funny part here is actually out of GSM Barcelona, which happened at the time before it gets to Barcelona, it used to be in, and I went to those guys. I just stumbled on those small Irish company, used to be called Adaptive Mobile. And they used to do security. So technically, their solution was MMS filtering. So back then, when we were talking about the multimedia service, and I thought of being in a conservative society, their solution would be perfect. So basically, I had a deal with them that we were going to exclusively represent them in the Saudi market. And I turned around, went back to Saudi Telecom, which obviously was my client, offered them the service. And I just didn't realize that this was the largest client and probably one of the first two they had. So it was kind of like a make or break to them. It was kind of an inflection point to the company. So the VP tells me, how about you get 5% of the company? Because I was like, I'm going to pay the commission. They're like, instead of getting paid that commission, which was $150,000 back then, why don't you just turn it into equity into the company? So I would get somewhere around 5% more or less. I was young. And I was like, I want the money. I don't care about this 5%. It's the money that I want. So I took the money. And then 2 years later, I actually had a deal with Yahoo back then. I think this was 2005 maybe. And the company all of a sudden is valued at over $150 million. And I'm like, oh, now. It's like, man, I've lost. And I just had short vision. So my biggest lesson there was I should have taken the risk. Given that I was not married, I didn't have any liability. So I had nothing to lose. But kind of I was short-sighted that I wanted to have that money in my bank account, which eventually was spent God knows on what. But there was a big learning there.
With the donut story, do you think you're able to succeed there because you didn't let your ego get ahead of you? Because you said that some people might have thought of you as the delivery guy, and maybe other people around you would have felt insulted by that. But then because you were in there and you were making those relationships, they helped you so much.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's very true. But again, I mean, uh, even I was just 6 months ago, I was asking myself, like, what if if we went back in time, would I actually, knowing what I've known back then, would I take a different path? And most of the time, my answer is no, because again, I mean, you only know what you know, and the unknowns were a lot. And again, I think the other factor is being in the Middle East, and specifically in Saudi Arabia. It's a large economy. It's kind of, I mean, it's the largest economy in the Middle East. And the problem is, and think of it this way, when you look into the map, and all you see on the map is Saudi Arabia, and it is the largest economy in the Middle East. Now, after moving to the US 9 years ago, you get to see the world map, and you get to see where and how these economies perform against each other. So you start basically benchmarking the economies, and this makes it a big difference comes into the play. But again, I mean, with that focus that I had at the time, I wouldn't think that I would make a different decision. I'm not saying that I regret it, but I learned a lot from it.
With the equity decision, once you found out that was now worth 150 million, did that change the way you looked at future opportunities? Was there any changes you made or any decisions you made? And you can kind of tell that was because of that decision you made back then.
Of course. So what happened after that is we started another company whereby we were like, any capital that we injected capital in the beginning. Again, it was with the same friends that I had in the beginning. And we were like, with every single profits we make, we'll reinvest it into the business, because now we want to have more of, let's say, a future prospect of it. But the problem was, again, we had one partner who always wanted to get into who wanted dividends to be distributed every time. And now, again, we missed the alignment here, I guess. But the biggest learning was, in fact, when I moved to that large ICT company in 2007, two things happened. One, I was very much, into sports. So one of the things that I noticed, Middle Easterns love soccer or football. Whatever the audience are coming from. So, but in the end, I think football is more common. And what I noticed, whenever we wanted to look into the Clásico, so Barcelona and Real Madrid, the Manchester City and Manchester United, you would go to the coffee shop and you would find it like full of people like a stadium. And I was like, well, there might be an angle here. There's a lot of interest. So back in 2007, there was no free services. So if you wanted to get the news of these sport clubs, you actually would have to subscribe for a premium service, be it SMS or MMS, to telcos, and telcos would make money, the clubs would make money, you would make money. So what I did was actually, there was some couple of local services in Saudi, which were making quite a good amount of money. And I was like, okay, but if I go and get international clubs, that would make more money, because all these people who are actually the fans who are distributed among the local clubs are actually united when it comes to the Spanish. In the end, La Liga, you're either a Madridista or you're a fan of Barcelona. And what I did, basically, I went out and I bought the digital rights for Barcelona and Real Madrid across the whole Middle East. And I started basically reselling them to the Middle East. What I recall, when I went to Barcelona, and I actually bought the rights for 4 years for $100,000. And it was kind of, at the time, they used to think of me as the dumb guy, because they didn't know, they see the Middle East as a blank spot, because there was no data points that tells them that they have a big fan base in the region. Or I would say a big fan base who's willing to pay for the service. And I turned around, I sold these rights for 1 year, each year worth of $300,000, and we make 60% of the revenue of the telco, which telcos would make. We were making some kind of $200,000 net profit every month from each service. This basically opened my eyes into the opportunity which is already out there in the sports, because most of these people doing sports business in the Middle East back then were not set up or structured as a business. So I was like, okay, now we started a full-fledged sport, doing all the player management, friendly games, sponsorship, and marketing. So we got into the sponsorship and marketing transaction between Saudi Telecom and Real Madrid. That was kind of like a $20 million deal at the time. And Then I went back to my owners my employers, and I was like, listen, we're going to start basically a business from scratch, greenfield telco, because I was thinking that the brand is not serving me, so we need to come up with a brand. At the time, Saudi was going through the bidding for the third license for mobile carrier, which was won by Zain. And basically, we kind of like had rumors that it's either an Egyptian consortium versus the Kuwaiti consortium that would win. I simply placed a bet on the Kuwaitis and started talking to other partners in Kuwait where they had a previous relationship with the operator there. And I told my employers that we're going to set up a new company. On all what I was asking for is 5% equity. So I learned from that previous experience. And I was basically set up as a CEO for the business. So we set up that joint venture. It was a company called Future Communication Guidance International. And we started building the company thereof. The whole idea at that point was, why having a joint venture? It's because building a new relationship with a new operator was a tough game. So the easy way for doing that was actually have a relationship with someone who knows the operator, and we basically, so the connection is already there, so we can build it and we can grow the business. And then what we know today, or what is defined as buying the business, the first contract was actually a complete loss on Excel sheet. So, and you can imagine, like, you're winning a contract where you know that you're losing. I mean, day one. But the idea was like, we need to step in and then we'll recover and get back on our feet. So we had that business / that digital sports business, which grew to get into full-fledged sports company. That was in 2007, 2008. 2010, Saudi Arabia actually decided to award the local sports channel the rights for the soccer league, the Pro League, which is pretty big. And it was the first attempt to have HD production going out. So we basically set a media company ahead of time. And strategically, I was like, I mean, we're not set up to be a TV. I typically prefer always to take the second seat, because I think whenever changes happen, it first hits the front seat. So you always want to be at least on the back, so you don't get hit first. And you're well prepared actually to defend your turf, I would say. So I went out to one of the TV channels that I thought that they're going to win. And I said, you guys, I spoke to them. I was like, you guys, you probably want to win the broadcasting rights. We'll do the production for you. And we went to a company that was doing the Premier League back then. And I've set up an agreement with them. So we started to basically have all the relationships in place. And then all of a sudden, the rights go to the national TV, to the government TV channel. And we were kind of ready. And the beauty of taking that second seat or the back seat is that we do not have any conflict of interest. And we were pretty much set to do the production. It was hell on earth, but we did it because it was set during the award came during Ramadan, which is a fasting month, which technically is a month where your productivity, if it was 100%, which is never 100%, you would lose at least 30 to 40% of your production capacity during that month. Yet, I remember I went to London probably 6 times just to set up this whole project. It was pretty decent contract, pretty large. We made it work. But then I resigned. And the main reason why I resigned is actually I got into a conflict with the employers. Back then, the way that the system is set up, which is totally different now. As an employee, as an you're not allowed to own your business. So you get into that catch-22 where your employer, I'm not sure of the rest of the world, but at least in the US, it is kind of like you're on an H-1B visa all the time. So the employers kind of control your destiny. And that's exactly what happened. So we got into that conflict. And at that point, I was like, okay, now what do I do next? And again, just to catch on that element, just to be clear, like I resigned because they recognized that I'm being an employee, but they did not recognize that. And I was like, and they're like, let's renegotiate. And I was like, I'm not negotiating a deal now that we have money in the bank, now that we have contracts in hand, now that we have a business, now that I was running 3 companies where I have over 700 employees. And everything has started from, just a simple plan on paper. And that is what I think it kind of like took me back. Typically, it was a hard reset for 10 years. So I stayed for almost a year and a half, just trying to figure out what's my next move. I was just giving different advisories to different family offices and investors. I never thought that I'm going to leave Saudi Arabia at any point in time. But then I was like, the regulations were changing and I wanted to have more control of my destiny. And that's when I decided that I'm going to move to the US. So that was 2013. And I remember that I went back to my wife and I was like, we're just going to move to the US in 2 months. And she was like, she was completely shocked and basically in rejection of that kind of decision. But I explained the rationale of that. In fact, my father, I remember that he was going like nuts about me traveling and moving, again, it's the traditional, they think of you like you're immigrating and they're not going to see you again. And I'm like, listen, this is probably a temporary move until something is figured out. And I had, a couple of girls that I need to worry about their future. And I think that it's a fair chance that I can get if I move to the US. Apparently, I didn't have savings, but maybe due to the lifestyle that I had a lot of things to sell, which are valuable. So I had a small amount of money. I moved to the US. It was kind of tough in the very beginning, to be honest, in the sense that you move there, like, I'm not sure if you've ever been to the Middle East. It's kind of large homes and you have the maids and the drivers. It's a very relaxing. And then you move to a pretty much small apartment and you have, it's kind of do it yourself all your life, which is fine because I used to do that when I was a kid. But then we had to go through an asylum process. So I went and actually on a B1, B2 visa, which is basically a tourism visa. And that was probably a point where I benefited from being as basically applied for an asylum. We went through the asylum process and it was granted and basically started doing business in the US. It was in the beginning, I was at the co-working space in San Francisco. And the whole idea for me was I just wanted to network. I knew that I'm able to build a new business because I did that 3 times before. But my issue was like a big part of doing business is the network. So if I don't have that element, I have 50%, but the other 50% is not there. And the main idea was like, I need to build a network. So I was going to San Francisco. I used to drive 1 hour every day to get to San Francisco's co-working space, typically with no goal, but building a network, knowing people, understanding how the system works.
How did you feel at this point? Like at this point, was it intimidating to do that move? Were you excited? What was your thinking at this point? I guess it must have been hard to have that hard reset.
It is kind of like you're throwing yourself to the unknown. Yet, at least I knew what the floor would be. I was willing to work as a taxi driver so long as I can. And I knew that with this kind of move, and it's kind of, people, you think it's changing lanes, but you're not actually changing lanes. You're just jumping in between towers. And you might just fall in the middle and God knows what's going to happen. You're going to break a neck and you're gone. But for me, it was kind of like, I knew that I'm going to go through some tough time. It's just that I would say it was kind of bet that I needed to take. And I'm a risk taker by nature. I've done this several times. This was actually the biggest risk I've ever taken in my life because at the time, I'm married, I have 2 kids, I'm moving to a new place. Thank God, at least my brother when I moved next to my brother, who was actually living in the US since '93. So I kind of had a family, but now you need to build your own network all over again. What am I going to do next? The idea was like, I'm going to build a startup, but and that's another funny part, because I thought that you just land in Silicon Valley and all the VCs are just waiting with their boards. Like, who's this entrepreneur who's coming? And someone is going to write you a check and it's going to be easy. I kept actually writing many, many ideas. I remember that I was in my notes, I had over 100 ideas. And I keep scratching and thinking, and what am I going to build? But I just didn't know what am I going to do. The main worry in the beginning was first, I need to adjust my status, get kids to school. Now, I did that for the first 3 months. And then now I need to build, but I don't know what I'm going to do. But the floor was pretty clear. And I was not ready to actually not to get up, I would say. I knew that I was knocked down, and it's just a matter of time to get back up. Did I know that I'm going to get back up? No. I can't say that I did. All I remember that my mom at some point, I was looking for a job, and she's like, and she knows me. And she knows that I actually hate to basically get to this 9 to 5 job. I'm not a jobs guy. And she's like, listen, don't worry about getting a job. And she gave me a small amount, and she was like, start your own thing, and don't worry about paying it back. Just focus on your life and don't worry. I mean, honestly speaking, she was my safety net in the sense that she was giving me all the comfort that will back you up in whatever you do. We know that you're going to do something good. It's just going to take you time. Just be patient. And that's exactly what happened. Next thing I know, I was never thinking that I'm going to end up as a VC at any point of time. That VC thing came by coincidence, where actually I had one of the wealth managers in Saudi who manages one of the wealthy families' wealth. He called me up one day. They had a transaction that they wanted to do in New York. Luckily, they had a very smart CFO who was like, yeah, but maybe we need to do some technical diligence prior to making that investment. So he calls me up because he don't want to lose the client. And he's like, can you do that? And I didn't have anyone to do that. I mean, he knew me as probably someone who has some technical background. I told him, you know what? I'll pull a team together and I'll do it. And we actually was a funny thing, because then I called up an old friend that I knew 10 years back. He was living in Chicago, and was like, listen, I have this project. I need to pull a team together. So we pull a team of 4. And we went through the whole due diligence process. And this actually opened up my eyes to the fact that there is capital in the Middle East, which wants to get into early stage in the US, but it is kind of a capital that does not know how to get there. And the other challenge is, it is the youngest in the families who want to get into this kind of asset class. But as you know, like the wealth is managed by the elders in the family, the parents, and those guys are pretty much either into tangible business, be it retail, real estate, or liquid, which becomes more of public equities. But then you come and tell them that, like, I wanted to invest in technology where it is intangible and it's illiquid. It's kind of like you're going exactly the opposite of everything they know. And that is when I thought, like, okay, now my forte is investing in early stage. I mean, I love to build companies and I love to see them growing. And I cannot just get there. So I was like, okay, now I'm going to build a company, which I'm going to have it into phases. I know where my goal is and where I want this to get. But to actually gain the trust and build the track record for these investors, I'll start doing it on late stage companies where you would just analyze the company. And if you think it's a good deal, you have enough conviction. Now I'm going to go out and raise capital for it. What we fund managers today call SPVs. And so you do it on deal by deal basis. So I did that for Snapchat.
And they did pretty well, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, well, it did well. And so we got into Snapchat, which we had very funny story and then we got into Lyft. So we did Snapchat in July 2015. We did Lyft in December. Each one of them had its own uniqueness into getting to these companies. And I had all the learnings that I needed to get there, to be honest.
And so you said there's a funny story about how you got into Snapchat.
Yeah. So in Snapchat, it's actually, we reached out to one of the investors who said he wants to invest $100 million. I was like, wow. Now, I mean, a guy who was at like just a couple of months earlier thinking about being a taxi driver, now he has $100 million to go to Snap. And I thought that if I reach out to Snap telling them, like, I have someone who's going to put up $100 million, I mean, I'm going to have all their ears at the time. So when I reached out, they're like, yeah, but who's the investor? So I disclosed the name, and they come back 2 days later, and they're like, no, we're not going to accept his money. And I'm like, okay, now this is chat. I mean, it was kind of really volatile 3 months for me, or 4 months, because like one day you have your hope and you feel that you're sitting on top of the sky, and the next day, like you're just, somewhere around the sun. So I basically realized now, okay, there's a problem with that investor. Let me look for someone else. But then the execs in Snap, they're like, yeah, but whoever you bring, we want to have direct relationship. And I'm like, okay, if you have the direct relationship, so I'm not a fund manager anymore. And I don't know how am I going to make money on that. So through this communication back and forth, basically I reached a level where the second man in Snap completely blocked me. So two things happened here. One, I realized that if I want to overrule whatever he did, I have to go to number one, which is the CEO of the company. I mean, if number two said no, it's only number one who can overrule him or overturn this decision. And the second thing, because of the communication that I had over a month, a month and a half almost, between Snap execs and myself, I I had, let's say, I would have been able to predict what the Evans email is simply by having many emails in the communication, because there was kind of, I think, 4 or 5 of their execs on the email chain. So what happened after the last meeting I had with Snap is I went back home to my friend. I was staying at my friend's place in Los Angeles, and I was just kind of venting of how Snap turned me down. And he had a roommate who was basically, I remember he was playing on PS at the time, and then like, who are you guys talking about? And I was like, yeah, we're just talking about Evan. And he started giving me all these stories about him and Evan back in Stanford and how they knew each other and they're close friends. And they had nicknames for each other and all that kind of stuff. I was like, and then for me, it's like, okay, this is either someone who's bluffing me 100%, or it is someone who's basically making my day. I decided to take my chance, and I actually created an email on my server with my French roommate name, and I sent 3 emails at night to Evan, claiming that I'm my friend. And I was shocked. 10 minutes later, I get a reply from Evan, and it's like, is the guy who missed that longtime friend of his. I went to the guy. I was like, listen, I'm sorry, but I basically created an email with your name, and I've actually emailed Evan. Now we need to take this over. And all I need to do is just get a meeting with Evan. Next thing I know is we got a meeting with Evan. I think it was 4 or 5 days later. And during the meeting, I didn't sleep for 48 hours, just literally drawing every single possible scenario of how things can work and trying to mitigate all these kind of stuff, because I just didn't want to get rejected again. It was funny because when we met Evan, he looked at me and immediately I was like, listen, by the way, we came to the company here before and we've met your second man and he rejected us. And he looked at me and he said, well, we had a problem with you that we didn't know you. And that was one big lesson. Most of the companies in the US, they would not accept your money if they don't know you, or if you didn't have a warm introduction to them. So it was kind of like the reference which was missing. And it's like, if you knew him, I mean, we definitely would have entertained the communication you reaching out to us. And he was like, then Evan looks at me and is like, what's your dream scenario? And I basically told him, like, I need this kind of allocation, and we need to have a fund structure, so don't ask me to bring the investors directly, because then I'm not going to be able to build a company. And he said, yes, fine. All this thing happened in 5 minutes. And the rest of the hour, they were chit-chatting and catching up. I was reaching out to investors, telling them that I have this deal, that it's kind of exclusive access. And we made it to Snapchat. It was kind of like, then now that you have your first deal, it's like how you scale the business, how you repeat the story, because it's kind of like solving the chicken and egg problem. So we solved that, and what took 3 months to get to Snapchat took 3 days to get Lyft. The reason being is that you have the track record, and it was kind of like pretty much easy for them to get the reference of what you have done. It was just, looking back and thinking of what happened back then, it's just kind of real funny stuff.
Yeah, it's just such an amazing story, because, like I said, at one point you're thinking about being a taxi driver and you're worried about how you're going to pay for like your girl's education and everything. And then you went from that to investing in Snap. And obviously now they've gone even further, and like Evan's somebody that lots of entrepreneurs look up to. And how did you build on that momentum? And you said that you like to invest in companies that are earlier in their stages. How did you make that shift from late stage companies to early stage? And what do you look for in those companies?
So post Snap and Lyft was pretty much, now that we have the relationship, in Lyft we had multiple investors who got in. And I told them, listen, now I'll have this small fund. And I didn't aim high. So we actually had a $4 million fund. And the idea was that we're going to throw like anywhere between $50,000 to $200,000 into each company, and we've invested I think in 13 companies out of that fund. And the main idea was building the relationship. And so, same like what entrepreneurs think, like whenever you're proposing and coming up with a new product or service, the first people that you start putting your plan or strategy is to attract the early adopters. So my early adopters, I was trying to figure out who loves technology and who would actually believe in me. So I went to the ones that would believe in me first, and which basically we've built a pretty strong relationship over time, who became friends more than investors today. And we started basically making these small investments into these companies. Along the road, I was kind of pretty much patient, I would say, in the sense that I wanted to get the fruits of Snap and Lyft, which we had exited in between 2017, 2018, and 2019. And then we had our second fund, which was kind of like $23 million fund. And most recently, 2020, we had our third fund, which is again, early stage, $50 million fund. And we started building a team out of that. And we started basically seeing the fruits after basically having these exits. So I would say these late stage transactions, which we occasionally would do still, and we probably do one or two a year. The beauty of them, you get the volume, the size, and kind of you hack your way to build a quick track record. But the joy, the real joy that I get is actually from these early stage games. I mean, these early stage bets and startups. But keep in mind, there is one important thing. A lot of people today, when you look into funds, you would measure by exits, and then everybody tries to think, I mean, a fund is just another startup. I mean, we're just active into that space. So the vertical that we're in, I believe that we're a startup into the investment space. And the way that we try to differentiate ourselves becomes a big thing, because one way to differentiate yourself is the size of the fund, which I think we're not into that game. So we're trying to understand where to position ourselves and where we would actually make an impact and added value to the companies. Being an operator, and I would say with an entrepreneur mindset, it's simply the angle where we can really add value is the Middle Eastern market, which a lot of people probably downplay for different reasons, one of which is but a lot of startups miss the power, the purchase power that the people have in this region, which probably, I mean, for each one user, they might be equivalent to 3 or 4 somewhere else. And sometimes I think it might be even more than that. And typically from a previous experience, probably I forgot to mention that thing. In 2006, I tried to set an agreement with Facebook to get to the Middle East. And I was trying to set a mobile service back then. I mean, 2006, you didn't have a smartphone. So in telecom, we used to have some what we call WAP services. So if you ever wanted to get into internet, you have to use a WAP service. So what I did, I reached out to Facebook. And they're like, man, I mean, there is not enough users in the region to look at. So typically, whenever you're looking into a growing good businesses, and I did the same with Stripe, by the way, when they first started. The reason they look down into the Middle East, it's one, there is a language barrier, there is a cultural barrier. They start thinking that this is a place where we're not sure if we're going to make money or not. And it's mainly because of lack of data and information. So what we try to bring into the table is like, we know that Middle East will still rank probably on their top 10, but it might be like on the lower end. We try to basically leapfrog other territories and bringing value by building the case for them of the Middle Eastern market. So they don't have to actually spend or distract themselves or spread their efforts thin. We would do the heavy lifting when it comes to that. Thus, I'm actually right now talking to you from Saudi Arabia. I'm talking from our office in Saudi. So we actually have a team on the ground. I would come myself and build relationships, open doors for the companies, helping them to get to the market, and use Saudi Arabia as a regional headquarter where they can actually not only serve Saudi, but they can serve a wider region, speaking about MENA and Pakistan. Now, by doing that, you're talking about almost a population of 300 million people. And the beauty of this distribution, when you're talking about this 300 million people, there are areas where you have strong economies and strong currencies, and there are areas of growth where you have a larger number of population. The common thing between both is actually a very young population, which is super important when you're looking to startups and technology. Infrastructure for technology is already available. So you're not talking about a place where you would worry about the infrastructure. So these kind of stuff that we try to bring into the table, and we try to help companies. And one way we claim that we differentiate ourselves, that we would cherry pick portfolio companies. The ones who want to come into the market, we would help them. The ones we think we can actually even have go the extra mile, we would probably propose having a local joint venture where we would capitalize the local entity, or let's call it a subsidiary for the moment, of the mothership. And we can have some sort of a relationship where we would build the company for them on their behalf and get the business in the region. So I think this is an area where we think we can differentiate ourselves. We're trying to build, if this strategy really works, now you think about the largest economy in the Middle East, you anchor yourself, and then you basically conquer the rest of the place. And I would love to replicate the same story in Brazil. So Latin America is another big market that we also look into. We do have actually 4 full-time members, and we've been very actively investing into early-stage startups in Brazil. And the reason why we picked up Brazil, it has the same characteristics that we were that Saudi has. It's the largest economy in the Latin American market. If you anchor yourself there, it's pretty much easy to to conquer the rest of the place. And I hope that this kind of, I would call it the power triangle that we might look into between the US, Latin American market, and the Middle East.
Can you share any of the success stories you've had as well? Because obviously you've invested in lots of companies now. What companies have you been able to break into the Middle East market effectively, and you've seen them grow because of that?
Well, we started to test that almost, I think, 3 years ago. So we did it with one company where we set up, so we were not the active partner, but we worked with them in getting the active partner out of Dubai. Unfortunately, they've just shut down their business in the US as a result of COVID. The company was doing amazingly good. It's called, but for some reason, again, when COVID hit, they were dependent on the foot traffic into their retail stores. You had everything shut down. Traffic goes down to zero. Business starts to free fall. So we got a big learning from that. Couple of other companies. One company actually, which just started in the US, we asked them to they're into the construction, and it was kind of moving to the Middle East would have been much easier. So they actually moved to Dubai and Saudi, and they started winning projects here and there. We think they'll turn around and get to the US at some point. Now we're actually actively helping a couple of companies to get more clients out of the Middle East. So we're just actively doing that. I think we would start seeing an inflection point in 23 and 24.
What's exciting you the most about what Graphene Ventures is doing now?
Well, the most exciting part is, and I think it will always remain, looking into early stage startups is exactly when you have a newborn baby. And you look into this newborn baby and you're thinking is he going to be a doctor? Is he going to be a lawyer? Is he going to be an engineer? You don't know. It's kind of like, okay, I want to place a bet on this child. I'm going to teach him and help him and try to get him to where he wants to get. Now, things might work, things might not work. It's just that the most exciting part is actually seeing these ups and downs of entrepreneurs. I've seen entrepreneurs crying in front of me. I've seen them coming back and jumping left, right, and center of happiness of getting a deal done. This kind of human relationship is what really excites me. Definitely along the line, you are for-profit institution, so you definitely expect to make money out of that. But the challenges these companies go through and seeing them turning these challenges into opportunities and winning them is what really excites me. And then it's the integration between all these portfolio companies. So when we're looking into a company with a team, typically I would think of, what can we bring into the table? Would they actually have any synergy with another portfolio company? Are we able to help them into getting into another market, and how they can grow? Having a simple email from a founder saying thank you, it actually gets you through the whole. And as I told you, along the side, investors make money, everyone is happy, but the learnings that you get from the failures are probably the most exciting part, because now you start thinking am I going to make the same mistake again or not? would I be able to spot the potential of such mistake happening again or not early on?
Is there any mistakes that you think that you can spot early on now that you think people listening right now should be aware of, and hopefully you can help them avoid it themselves?
Well, one common mistake I've seen is founders tend to get delusional at some point. And part of it, again, I understand the attachment they get to the company they're building, the hunger for success. Sometimes I think it's distraction by what they read out on the media. At this current of, macro economy, I think they need to be aware it's not as easy to raise capital and it's not as easy to build a company. Yet, most successful companies came out in such climate. And to do that, they need not to worry about getting diluted. They need not to worry about if the business is growing, if there is some kind of a slow growth to their business, without having to benchmark themselves to how much did the peer founder raised for his company. Because some of them are really good at raising, but not executing. But they need to understand, like, what investors are looking for is ones who are good in execution and then raising capital, not the other way around. And they have to what really, really matters is that they just, even if they had to slow down and ramp down and probably lay off people, which we hate to see, but in reality, probably the hyper growth mode does not work all the time. And you have to navigate your way and just make sure that you stay alive, because that's what really matters. You might go through a down round now. This shouldn't put you down, even though that you maybe expected that you'll keep 20% of the company and you end up keeping 5%. Question is, did you make sure that this company succeeds and gets to the end of that line and make it? Or did the company just went down and you don't care? It's investors' money, but now you would want to build a new. And I think you keep opening more opportunities. What you need to think about, there's a lot of people who are probably also benefiting from the businesses that you are building, and there's a lot of learnings. And if you do well, you would start doing. If you do good, you'll do well in the end, and you can build your second and third company. And the learnings, you'll take out all the mistakes and learnings that you had before in the previous business. What really makes a big difference here, I think, is age and experience, because you can read about previous downturn economies, but if you didn't live them, you would not know what are the signals. Books are beautiful, documentaries are nice, but reality is different. All these signals, I can probably tell what happened in 2008. I can slightly understand what happened in the bubble. But can you tell this to someone who's 25 years old now? They can only read about it. And they think that if they read about it, it is what's going to get them through. But I think they need to probably get to some elders who went through that experience and ask about the surroundings. And basically, if they encounter all these things into their mind, hopefully they will do good.
It's been great to talk to you today, Nabil. Where can people hear more about you, more about Graphene Ventures and what you're up to?
Unfortunately, I tweet a lot, but in Arabic. So you probably need to keep pressing on that translate button. And the reason is, I believe there is a lot of English content, so it's pretty much easy to get to that. I'm trying to give access, and for me, I look at it as more of a social responsibility. The Arab world, where there is a lot of, over 200 million youth out there and a lot of founders. So I try to actually translate and the knowledge of what I'm going through and what I've seen in the Western world to the Middle Eastern crowd. And I do the same actually on some of the media. So I post a lot of videos, again, unfortunately in Arabic. But I'm always read at my email, which is basically nabil@graphenevc.com. We're more than happy to talk to founders. Sometimes, a lot of people seek advice, which I'm more than happy to do so. I actually dedicate some office hours to talk to fellow founders and entrepreneurs. Portfolio company or not, I don't care. What really matters is actually helping the youth and young generation build their companies and change the world. And alongside that, you'd be more than happy, to be honest, doing something feeling that there's an impact, a very small, minor impact to the world. So just having my dot, I wouldn't say that like at this point, is something that it's something which is really, and more than happy to help as much fellow founders and entrepreneurs that I can.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Amandeep, and wish you all the best. Thank you for having me today.